But without further ado, we're excited to be joined by Camila Camborda, the Associate Director of State Policy and Advocacy at the Data Quality Campaign, who will give us her expertise and insights as to how states can build and strengthen SLDSs and data systems in general to better inform policy decisions and align education and workforce needs. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Camila. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for your patience in joining us today. I am really excited to be here and chatting with all of you. I mentioned this a little bit ago, but apologies for the unusual background. I'm currently in New Orleans for the National College Attainment Conference, and so hence the hotel background. But I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my slides. Let's see. What is the best way to do this? Can I get some thumbs up if you all can see that?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, perfect. And thank you, Mark, for the virtual thumbs up. All right. So as Eric said, I am here today to talk to you all about statewide longitudinal data systems, or SLDSs. They're called many different things in different places. You might have heard of integrated data systems or P20W or P20W plus systems, but for the purposes of today, we'll be referring to them as SLDSs. My name is Camila. Once again, I am the Associate Director for State Policy and Advocacy at the Data Quality Campaign. My role is to partner with states, advocates, policymakers, community organizations, and really help them untie their knots when it comes to ensuring that data policy works for people, specifically when people are navigating their education and workforce journeys. I'm also joined by a colleague of mine, Rachel Wallace, who is also on this webinar. She is a senior associate on our team and very recently has become our go-to when it comes to workforce data in particular. So I'm excited that she's joining this conversation as well. And she'll be helping me monitor the chat while I present. So as I go along, if folks have questions, please feel free to raise your virtual hand. You should have that as an option on the bottom of your Zoom screen under reactions. So you all can just go ahead and raise a hand and I'll do my best to get to you. Otherwise, we also have some time reserved for Q&A at the end. So I think that was all of my housekeeping. Who is the Data Quality Campaign? For those of you who are not yet familiar with us, we are a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We work at the federal level as well as with states, and we are advocates. And we like to say that our line in the sand is that data should work for people, specifically as they are navigating their education and workforce journeys. So we've been around for 20 years. This is our 20th year anniversary. And we really pride ourselves on being responsive when states call, right? Or when advocates call us. So meeting all of you here virtually today, my contact information will be at the end of this slide deck. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me after this presentation as more questions might pop up. So we like to say that we want data to work for people. What does that actually mean and look like in practice? And so we like to start conversations about data by talking about people directly. So data working for people really means that whoever you are, whether you are a first generation student like Grace, who is in high school and trying to figure out her best path to a 4-year institution, whether you are a student like Raj, who knows that he wants to go directly into the workforce after high school graduation, or a student like Lisa, who is currently enrolled in a CTE program and not really sure what comes next for her, whether it's an apprenticeship or some sort of role. Regardless of which of these young people you are, and I'm sure these young people are represented amongst the folks that you all work with and serve, it means that they have access to the information they need to make the best informed decisions for their individual journeys. And it also means that the folks who support them, whether it's their teachers, their counselors, their school leaders, policymakers in their state, and their families also have the information they need in order to support their journey. So it's about the individuals having information as well as everyone who is invested in supporting them. In other words, it's taking the data that is currently being collected by states, right? We know that states collect data at all levels when it comes to early education, K-12, post-secondary, and the workforce and beyond, and really taking it from this siloed, fragmented place that it currently is in a lot of places into a place where it is usable, accessible, and organized in a way to serve people's individual journeys. So I'll just start right off from the top. What is an SLDS? What is a statewide longitudinal data system? And I'll give us a chance to practice that hand raising tool. So if just show of virtual hands, who is familiar with an SLDS or familiar with what the term means? If you could raise your virtual hand. Okay, we've got one. Anyone else heard of an SLDS before, know what they are? Okay. A couple more hands. Perfect. All right, that is very helpful as I dive right into the definition. So no worries if you haven't heard of one before, we'll talk about it now. So put very simply, a statewide longitudinal data system is an integrated data system that connects state level information that is about individuals. So over time, that's the longitudinal aspect of it, and across sectors. So how I mentioned early childhood, K-12, post-secondary, and the workforce, those are really the basic contributing agencies, right, for an SLDS. However, in some states, there are additional sources of data that go in, whether it's juvenile justice data, health and human services data, or other pieces of data like that. But just, for our conversation today, it's really these main four building blocks. The next piece is that this is for a state-specific need or purpose. So this is not connecting data for data's sake. It is for a purpose that is aligned to supporting education and workforce journeys. And then that last piece, which is hugely important, is with appropriate privacy protection. So done so in a way that's secure and safe, since we're dealing with people's personal information. And one point I want to emphasize is that this is not about collecting new data, right? I'll say that a couple of times. It's about putting together the data is already being collected in a way that serves the state's education and workforce goals. This is an illustration. It's possibly a little overwhelming, but it's an illustration of what this might look like in a state. So you see at the top, there is that statewide longitudinal data system, that P20W system, and then you'll see all of the individual pieces of information that go into it. So there's that early childhood information, and for those folks who know early childhood systems, you know that information lives across a variety of agencies, sort of corresponding to the wide variety of agencies that administer early childhood programs. There's K-12 information, there's post-secondary systems, your community colleges, your technical colleges, and then you have workforce information as well. And so that's really more of a visualization of what it might look like when that information is going in. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, SLDSs are called all sorts of different things, but they also might look different in each state depending on the state's priorities. So across the country, states have prioritized what we call different functions for their systems, aligned to meet the goals of the state at the time in which it was building the system. So while they have the shared characteristics, that individual level data over time across agencies, the primary function of the system might vary. Now, that's not to say that a state's SLDS cannot meet more than one function. It's to say that they usually have one primary function in mind. So those three main functions are the following. It's as you can see in this Venn diagram here, one of the functions is about dashboards and public reports. That is a system that is mostly interested in providing transparent, consistent information that displays and clarifies outcomes. That is sort of the function around dashboards and reports. You also have a function around research and analytics. Now, that is a system that is more so oriented towards making data available to authorized parties, authorized researchers, right, who need to develop really nuanced information, nuanced analyses, and gain very particular insights from the data. And then you have this third function that is services or support to individuals. And this is really oriented around providing personalized services to individuals so they can access education or workforce or public services. I'll say that most of the states that have an SLDS at this point have focused them on the public reports and dashboards or on the research and analytics functions, but we are seeing states also start to focus on this last function, which is services to individuals, which is something that's really exciting, especially for folks like us who really care about ensuring that people have access to the data that they need in order to be successful. The last piece I'll share on the sort of what about SLDSs is this map that shows what states have legislation that authorizes or mandates an SLDS. Now, to be clear, legislation is not a prerequisite to establishing an SLDS. There are states that do not have legislation that do in fact have an SLDS. However, from our 20 years of partnering with states, what we have learned and what we have noticed is that states that have their SLDSs in statute tend to have SLDSs that last the longest, last across administrations and shifting priorities, are funded, right, receive investments, and sort of have purposes that are established in the law. And that's really powerful when you think about the power of these systems and the goals that you want them to support. So this is just a map showing which are the states that have legislation to do so. All right, I don't see any questions, so I'll just keep on going. So that's the what of an SLDS. And so now I'll go ahead and talk about the why of an SLDS, right? So why are we here today? Why have states gone through the trouble of either building an SLDS or passing a law establishing an SLDS? What's the sort of really why behind all of this? And simply put, SLDSs, because of the unique information they bring together, have the potential to allow policymakers and researchers and even individuals the information to learn about which pathways work, right? Which programs work, what should we be investing in, what should young people spend their time doing in order to be successful. From a sort of policy perspective, right, I really see these benefits, or most of the benefits that come from these systems as falling into one of these two buckets. The first is understanding what works, right? So SLDSs really have this potential to be a neutral purveyor of just the facts, providing research, evidence, and transparency, perhaps even separate from the agencies that are providing these programs, and really allow folks like policymakers and researchers to know what is working, right? We see this as a very common use of SLDSs is as this engine that provides information. Related to that, SLDSs can also serve as an engine to power really innovative policies. So if folks are familiar with programs that are emerging across the country around direct admissions or streamlined admissions or things of that nature, a lot of the states putting those sorts of policies into practice are leveraging the ability to connect data through their SLDS in order to implement those programs. So it's about understanding what works, but then also investing in programs that work and being able to really capitalize off of that data collection, linking, sharing in service of these programs. The second big bucket is transparency. So I'll talk about this a little bit more further in the presentation, but when you have an SLDS that is considered best practice, that is one that is governed or overseen by a group of leaders who are authorized by law to make the decisions about the system, who are responsible for keeping the data safe. This goes a long way towards really building upon trust in data that people need to have in order to use it, right? People aren't going to use data they don't trust. And so having, a best practice SLDS that is governed transparently with open meetings, bringing members of the public into it, is really a way of not only being transparent, but engaging the communities that you hope to serve, and making sure that these systems aren't just built, but people are using them. So those are really the two sort of big buckets of benefits that we really see. Oh, yes, I see a hand raised.
Camille, I just wanted to elevate a question in the chat for you.
Sure.
You kind of answered it on the last slide, but Nancy asked, would you consider direct admissions to college to be support for individuals? So just kind of, could you talk about how, if we would categorize that as a specific function, or if that goes just into understanding what works for a specific state context?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nancy. So, absolutely, direct admissions would definitely be support for individuals, and like I said, we're seeing states leverage their SLDSs in order to pursue these policies. And so, two examples come to mind right off the bat. The first is Idaho. So Idaho, their SLDS, their SLEDs as they call it, they have one. The function for the SLDS for them is really around research and analytics. It's a very research focused SLDS. However, they have been able to leverage the data being connected and linked and shared in order to create a streamlined admissions program. So if you go to, I believe it's called Apply Idaho, students are able to, yes, exactly. Yes, states are really growing on this. Idaho is one of them. California is one of them. So happy to talk more about direct admissions more. But that's, I think, such a exciting use case for these systems. And in fact, Rachel might be able to drop a link in the chat. We just put out a resource about this at DQC for folks who want to dig more into this. So thank you for elevating that. All right, I'll keep on zooming through these slides. So this just brings us back to sort of where we started when we're thinking about the why, right? Nancy raised the use case of direct admissions, right? But really there might be a wide variety of use cases that really motivate why you might be supportive of these systems based on what region you work in, based on the kind of work that you do, whether it's supporting students into their college or career pathways, whether it's connecting students to supports that help them complete their college education, so not just getting to college, but getting through college, whether it's helping job seekers in your state navigate into higher paying or upskilling for different careers, or whether it's ensuring that the folks in your universities who may be doing research or the folks that work at nonprofits who are doing research have access to the information to better inform their programs. I see another question in the chat. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Rachel, for sharing those resources. Some additional use cases that we've also been working on that we're really excited to release are around early childhood and wraparound K-12 services. So we're seeing a real potential here in order to leverage these linked data systems and to make accessing early childhood services easier for families, reduce the reporting burden on early childhood providers, ensure that childhood services are more connected for K-12 students, and also provide information for K-12 leaders. So we have a lot of use cases, but I think one of the things that I think is really helpful in having these conversations is finding the use case that really speaks to the folks that you work with, right? Or coming up with your own. All right. I also want to show you all really specific examples of what states who have SLDSs are currently doing with them. So sort of get out of the theoretical and get a little bit more into the what is possible right now. So I'll highlight a couple of states based on their different functions. So Texas has an SLDS. They it's really focused around this research and analytics function, right? So allowing secure access for researchers to get the data they need in order to come up with these really detailed analyses. And as a result of that access, right, they're able to produce this range of reports and dashboards that really show early childhood through workforce outcomes. So this is just a screen grab from their website, and it shows you things like participation in AP programs, wage comparisons by educational attainment, all this information that really answers a lot of the questions that we have as practitioners sometimes, which is what programs are working, what is really helping students be successful, not only in getting to college, but getting into a family and life sustaining wage and a career afterwards. So that's all really great information that they're able to have by bringing in this information from the Texas Education Agency, their Higher Education Coordinating Board, and the Workforce Commission. So that's one example. We can also look to a state like Kentucky. So Kentucky's SLDS is called KY Stats. Folks might have heard of KY Stats. It is one of the most long-running SLDS programs. They started around 2013, and they're really an exemplar when it comes to the nationwide picture of data systems. And I'm happy to talk more about Kentucky whenever folks have more questions about them. But I think the thing that really stands out to us who look at it from a national perspective is that Kentucky's system was really established to provide just the facts, like nonpartisan, fact-based information to their policymakers. And so they are able to put out a lot of really good information that helps inform policy decisions in the state. So the screen grab here from KY Stats is a workforce overview report. So it provides a snapshot of the workforce in Kentucky at the state and local levels. And you're even able to, which I think is a really interesting feature, disaggregate it by county, but also by representative, right? So you can see, whose district has certain trends. And so I think that's a really great use of that resource. They also have something that I really find very useful, which is a high school feedback report. This is one of the first tools they really put out as a system that really, I think, cemented their value to the schools in their state, because I think a lot of times when you talk to people about data collections, they'll say, I'm sending you all this data. What am I getting back from it? And so what KY Stats did pretty early on was send the principals of every high school in the state a feedback report saying, here's where your students are after graduating. Here's how they're doing. And so they were able to have direct information back, right, as a sort of, benefit to submitting data. And so that was a really immediate win for the SLDS in their state, and one that really directly puts information into the hands of decision makers to improve their programs or double down if things are going well. So that's Kentucky. And then the third example I want to share, more under this services to individuals or support for individuals function, is Arkansas. So Arkansas, our data has an SLDS. They not only focus on services for individuals, they also focus on dashboards quite a bit. But what I wanted to highlight from Arkansas was this, again, the screen grab over here, where if you are a job seeker in Arkansas, you can go onto our data, and there's a tool so that you can explore different career paths based on the skill sets that you have or the credentials that you might have. You can find which jobs in your area are in high demand if you're thinking about making a job transition or going back to receive supplementary education. And it also gives you information to prepare for other programs. And so this is an example of a direct support to individuals that is made possible by this data all coming together and the insights that are produced from that data. This slide is mostly just a summary of what we've been talking about, right? These main three buckets. So empowering students, helping them achieve economic mobility, helping folks get into high quality, stable employment, and also transfer or find new sources of employment. And then lastly, systemic change, right? So not only helping individuals, but ensuring that as leaders, as policymakers, as agency heads, we are investing in what works and ensuring that those programs are available. All right. So we talked about the what, we talked about the why, and so now we'll talk about the how we get there. So the current landscape, I want to start off by focusing on where we are now, the current landscape in both Kansas and Missouri. So starting off with Kansas, Kansas is one of 16 states that do not have a law mandating an SLDS. And while Kansas, through their K-12 department, does link some information, some K-12 and post-secondary information, there is not currently a full P20W connected data system in the state. So that is, that is part of the landscape. And really, I think, for all the reasons that we've seen going through these slides, there's really a lot of questions that need to be answered, right? In terms of student outcomes, post-secondary outcomes, and things of that nature, that need to be answered with more information and connected information. Missouri, on the other hand, does have an SLDS. It is not codified in law like many other states are from that map that we looked at earlier. And while the system exists, what we've heard from a lot of our partners, and obviously curious to hear your all's experience, what we've heard from a lot of partners is that it's really not living up to its potential. It's not serving the needs of earners and learners or students and job seekers in the state, and that it's not nearly transparent enough to the public. And so that's the landscape there, right? Also many questions that folks have that need to be answered, that could be answered, but is not currently being met, or the needs are not currently being met by the system as it is today. So a few years ago, the Data Quality Campaign, we gathered up a group of 40 of our state and national partners, and looking at states as they were at that time and thinking about where they were then and where they needed to be in terms of having these systems that really help folks as they are navigating their education and workforce journeys. And so what we determined from our work, from our research, is that there's really these 10 enabling conditions that are really necessary in every state in order to get there. Now, they're all important, right? It's not, you can do a few of these. These really are all critical, and they do all work together hand in hand in order to make it so that, whether your state is building an SLDS, modernizing an SLDS, this data is really used as a tool to help individuals and help those who support them. So I am not going to go through all of these recommendations today. I am more than happy to talk about them in the Q&A or follow up on them after this presentation. But the one that I do want to highlight, and the sort of first among equals here, is this first recommendation around codifying cross-agency data governance into state law. Now that sounds like a lot of jargon, right? But essentially what that means, and we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, is that this means that there is an independent body in charge of overseeing how data is collected, linked, shared, and accessed in a statewide longitudinal data system. That's essentially what it means. And what we have found from working with states is that the states that are the most successful in producing the tools, the reports, the dashboards, the services that really help people have strong cross-agency data governance. And that has allowed them to be sustained across administrations, across priorities, and in a lot of cases, bring in outside voices, bring in members of the public, and ensure that these systems serve the purpose that they're intended to serve. So that's really the most powerful, we think, of the recommendations that we have, and this connects to a lot of the issues that we've discussed so far, like privacy and access, right? But that's really the one that I want to highlight. And I see a question in the chat. Oh, Rachel, great. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So this is my last slide because I do want to leave time for Q&A. And I really wanted to end on taking the current landscape of where Kansas and Missouri are now, laying our policy recommendations over that, and then saying, what are the specific policy recommendations based on the state? So starting off with Kansas once again, really the primary one here is legislation that would establish an SLDS, right? Joining that list of states that have mandated or authorized an SLDS in law, and taking that step further and saying, and here is the independent body that will oversee how data is collected, linked, shared, and kept secure, right? That is the most powerful lever we think that can be pulled. And the other benefit of legislation is that in legislation, you can say, and this is what the system is meant to do. It's meant to serve workers. It's meant to serve students navigating their education and workforce journeys, right? Those things can all be included in that bill text, which can, really be a powerful tool when saying, hey, the system isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. Building on top of that, that independent governing body, right, can and should be charged with things like developing a research agenda, right? What is the system going to look into first, right, amongst the many needs? Overseeing data privacy, ensuring that it's kept safe and secure, and ensuring the creation of tools and resources that are helpful for people. I think another opportunity here for Kansas is leveraging what other states have learned. That is a benefit of sort of having other states take these steps first, is you're really able to look at the landscape and say, where have they succeeded and where have they run into roadblocks, and how can we learn from those roadblocks? So one example I like to highlight here is California. So California is actually still in the midst of building their SLDS. They very recently passed a law creating it back in 2021. And so they're late to the race, right? They started a lot later than other states like Kentucky, Maryland, Washington, and Texas. But they've really been able to take a lot of the learnings from how other states have done these processes and sort of infused it with their own innovation. So that's an example of sort of that benefit. And then the last one is another best practice around these systems is making sure that it lives in the right place. Ideally, a non-contributing agency, an agency that is not contributing data to the system. That really helps with things like trust and neutrality as a perception of the data. But again, it's really what makes sense for the state and the individual context. For Missouri, they're not entirely different. The first recommendation would really be around ensuring that the SLDS is codified in law. Again, for all the reasons we've discussed, sustainability, defining responsibilities, all of that. The Missouri SLDS is overseen by a P20 council, which is a great first step. However, in order to really give it that best practice level, it would be a lot more powerful for it to have decision-making authority, right? Not just be an advisory body on how data is collected, linked, accessed, shared, but decision-making about how that is done, composed of agency heads, perhaps members of the public, and also charged with protecting privacy, engaging with outside organizations, right? So ensuring that the end users, the desired end users for this data have a seat at the table and are brought into these conversations, ensuring that you have the staff and the structure at the SLDS to create these tools, to create these resources. And then lastly, just, ensuring that the SLDS, now that it's built, is really being used for providing useful, relevant, actionable information for folks who need it. So those are the main recommendations. And those are all of my slides. And really just ending on this piece, as Eric put it at the beginning, we're really here to think about supporting education to opportunity pathways for folks. And this is just a really great tool in the toolkit in order to ensure that information plays a part in that and having access to the information that helps folks succeed. So with that being said, this is my contact information. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So I can take some questions, but I can definitely pull my slides back up if folks need them in order to reference once again. So I'll go ahead and stop there.
Great, thanks so much.